Picture this. It's 1944, and somewhere beneath the cliffs of northern France, German engineers are building something absolutely insane. Not a bunker, not a factory, a gun. But not just any gun. A gun with a barrel longer than a football field. A gun that doesn't need planes or rockets. A gun that could fire across the English Channel and rain shells down on London from another country. This weapon was called the V3, and if it had worked the way the Nazis planned, the entire course of World War II might have been different. But here's the weird part. You've probably never heard of it. You know about the atomic bomb. You know about the V2 rocket. Hell, you probably know about the V1 flying bomb. But the V3? The supergun that was supposed to terrorize an entire city from 100 miles away? Almost completely forgotten. Today, we're going to fix that. Because this story has everything. Mad science, underground fortresses, the most powerful bombs ever dropped up to that point, and one of the most ambitious engineering failures in military history. So buckle up. This is the story of Hitler's supergun and why it never fired a single shot at its target. The situation in 1944. Let's set the scene. It's 1944, and if you're Adolf Hitler, things are not great. The Eastern Front? Collapsing. The Red Army is steamrolling toward Germany like an angry freight train made of tanks and fury. The Western Front? Well, D-Day just happened. The Allies are in France, and they're not leaving. And perhaps most importantly, Germany's cities are being absolutely pounded from the air. Night after night, British and American bombers are turning German industrial centers into rubble. The writing is on the wall, and it's written in fire. Enter the Wunderwaffen. So what does Hitler do? What any desperate dictator would do. He becomes obsessed with wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen. The idea was simple. Forget conventional warfare. Germany needed game changers. Weapons so revolutionary, so terrifying, that they could turn the tide of the entire war. And thus was born the Vergeltungswaffen program, vengeance weapons. You know some of these. The V1, essentially the world's first cruise missile. A flying bomb that sounded like a demonic motorcycle and killed over 6,000 people in Britain. The V2, the world's first ballistic missile. A genuine rocket that went to the edge of space before coming down on London. Terrifying, deadly, and the ancestor of every space rocket and ICBM we have today. But there was supposed to be a V3. And unlike the V1 and V2, which at least saw significant use, the V3 barely gets mentioned in history books. Why? Well, we're getting there. The V3 concept, artillery on steroids. Here's what made the V3 different from siblings. The V1 and V2 were cutting edge, but they were also expensive and took time to produce. Each V2 rocket could only be used once, and building them required rare materials and slave labor working around the clock. The V3, on the other hand, was supposed to be cheaper, faster to build, and capable of firing hundreds of times per day. Imagine, instead of launching expensive rockets that may or may not hit their target, you could just keep shooting, over and over and over. It was supposed to be like having a machine gun pointed at London from France. The British called it the London gun. The Germans called it Hochdruckpump, the high-pressure pump. Because apparently, even when building superweapons, Germans can't resist a good boring name. But the designation that stuck was V3, Vengeance Weapon Number 3. And unlike V1 and V2, this one was supposed to make the enemy suffer constantly. So what actually was this thing? All right, let's talk about what made the V3 so bonkers from an engineering perspective. Imagine a normal artillery gun. You load a shell, there's one big explosion in the chamber, and boom, the shell flies out. Simple, effective. Been doing it that way for centuries. The V3 said, what if we did that? But way more complicated. The multi-stage cannon. Here's the genius/insanity of it. The V3 had a barrel that was over 130 meters long. That's longer than a football field. Longer than the Statue of Liberty is tall. But here's the kicker. All along that barrel, there were side chambers. Little rooms branching off the main tube. Each of these chambers contained an additional explosive charge. So here's what happens when you fire. The shell starts at the bottom with the main charge, boom. It accelerates up the barrel. As it passes the first side chamber, boom. Another charge goes off, pushing it faster. Second chamber, boom. Third chamber, boom. And so on, all the way up the barrel. By the time the shell exits, it's been accelerated not by one explosion, but by dozens. It's basically a gun that works like a rocket, except the rocket is stationary and the shell just gets kicked in the ass repeatedly until it's going fast enough to cross the English Channel. Absolutely mental. The numbers are insane. Let's put this in perspective. Barrel length, 130 plus meters, over 420 feet. Projectile weight, 140 kilograms, about 310 pounds. Planned rate of fire, up to 300 rounds per hour. Range, 165 kilometers, about 103 miles. Target, London. Do the math. If they could sustain that rate of fire, that's potentially 600 shells per day landing on London. Not precision strikes, not surgical attacks, just constant, random terror from the sky. Why this design? You might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Why not just build a really big normal gun? Good question, hypothetical viewer. The problem with making a traditional gun powerful enough to shoot 165 kilometers is that you need a massive explosion in the chamber. And that explosion would either A, destroy the gun itself, or B, require a barrel so thick and heavy it couldn't be built or transported. The multi-stage design was supposed to solve this. By spreading out the acceleration, you could achieve the same range without blowing up your own gun. In theory. Why London? Let's talk about the target. Because this wasn't just about hitting any city. This was specifically about London. Why? Well, partly revenge. The British had been bombing German cities for years. Hitler wanted payback, but it was also psychological warfare on a massive scale. The plan, break British morale. The V-3 wasn't designed to destroy military targets. It wasn't accurate enough for that. The shells would land pretty much randomly across a huge area. And that was kind of the point. Imagine you're a civilian in London in 1944. You've already survived the Blitz. You've endured the V-1 flying bombs. At least you could hear those coming and take cover. You've even started dealing with the V-2 rockets, which gave no warning at all. But now imagine this. Every few minutes, all day, every day, another shell just lands. Somewhere. Could be your neighborhood. Could be across town. No way to know. No air raid sirens. No aircraft engine sounds. Just random explosions, constantly for weeks or months on end. That's not a military strategy. That's psychological torture. The distance, 165 kilometers of nope. The English Channel at its narrowest point is about 34 kilometers. But London? London is about 165 kilometers from the northern French coast. For context, that's like trying to hit Chicago from Milwaukee, or hitting one major city from another major city that you can't even see because there's a massive body of water and 100 miles of countryside in between. With 1940s technology, using a gun, the sheer audacity of this plan is breathtaking. In a terrifying way, the fortress, Mimoyecques. So where do you build a gun that's the length of a skyscraper lying down? You can't exactly set it up in someone's backyard. Enter Mimoyecques. This was a complex of tunnels and chambers carved into the limestone hills of northern France, near Calais. The Germans have been building fortifications there since they occupied France, and it was perfect for the V-3. Why this design? You might be wondering, why go through all this trouble? Why not just build a really big normal gun? Good question, hypothetical viewer. The problem with making a traditional gun powerful enough to shoot 165 kilometers is that you need a massive explosion in the chamber. And that explosion would either A, destroy the gun itself, or B, require a barrel so thick and heavy it couldn't be built or transported. The multi-stage design was supposed to solve this. By spreading out the acceleration, you could achieve the same range without blowing up your own gun. In theory. Why? Location, direct line to London, within range. Protection, buried under rock and concrete, basically bomb-proof, or so they thought. Concealment, hidden from aerial observation. Angle. The hillside naturally pointed toward England. The plan was to install not one, not two, but 50 of these massive gun barrels, all angled toward London. 50. Can you imagine? 50 football field-length gun barrels, all firing hundreds of times a day. The Germans believed this site was virtually invulnerable. A fortress that could rain destruction on London with impunity. Spoiler alert, they were wrong. Someone noticed. Here's the thing about building a massive underground fortress. It's really hard to keep secret. Allied intelligence had been keeping close tabs on anything suspicious happening in occupied France. And by 1943, they started noticing some weird stuff going on near Mimoyecques. Aerial reconnaissance photos showed construction. Lots of construction. And while the Germans try to camouflage it, there's only so much you can hide when you're digging tunnels big enough to fit a gun barrel longer than a football field. The French resistance also got involved, sending reports about unusual German activity in the area. By early 1944, the Allies knew something was being built there. They just weren't entirely sure what. Figuring out the threat. Initially, intelligence analysts thought it might be another V-2 launch site, but the layout didn't match. Some thought it might be for V-1 flying bombs, but again, it didn't quite fit. Eventually, through a combination of aerial photos, resistance reports, and capture documents, they pieced together the truth. The Germans were building some kind of super artillery installation, and it was pointed at London. The decision: destroy it. Once the Allies figured out what Mimoyecques was, the decision was obvious. It had to be destroyed before it became operational. But there was a problem. This wasn't just some surface target you could blow up with regular bombs. This was a heavily fortified underground complex, protected by meters of rock and concrete. You know what they needed? They needed the biggest, baddest bombs the Allies had. They needed Tallboys. The Tallboy, Britain's earthquake bomb. Let me tell you about the Tallboy, because this bomb was special. Designed by Barnes Wallis, the same guy who invented the bouncing bomb used in the famous Dam Busters raid. The Tallboy was a 5-ton monster specifically designed to destroy hardened targets. But here's what made it unique. It wasn't meant to hit its target and explode on impact. Instead, it was designed to penetrate deep underground and then explode. The idea was to create an earthquake effect, a massive underground shockwave that would collapse tunnels, shatter foundations, and basically liquefy anything built underground. Think of it like dropping a bunker buster that causes a localized earthquake, perfect for a target like Mimoyecques. Operation Crossbow. The bombing campaign against the V-weapon sites was called Operation Crossbow, and Mimoyecques became a priority target. On July 6, 1944, the RAF sent Lancaster bombers armed with Tallboys to hit the facility. Now, dropping a Tallboy wasn't like dropping a regular bomb. These things had to be released from high altitude with incredible precision. We're talking hitting a specific area from over 15,000 feet while the Germans are shooting at you. But the crews of 617 Squadron, the famous Dam Busters, were very, very good at their jobs. Direct hit. One of the Tallboys scored a direct hit on one of the main shafts. And remember what I said about the earthquake effect? Yeah, the explosion didn't just damage one tunnel. The shockwave collapsed multiple tunnels, destroyed several of the gun barrels that had already been installed, and caused such structural damage that further construction became nearly impossible. But the Allies didn't stop there. More attacks. Over the following weeks, the site was hit multiple more times. Each raid caused more damage, more collapses, more destruction. By August 1944, Mimoyecques was essentially dead. The main installation was in ruins. The ambitious plan to fire 50 guns at London was over. The V-3 Supergun, the weapon that was supposed to rain constant terror on London, never fired a single shot from its intended location. But that's not quite the end of the story. The Luxembourg guns. Here's where it gets interesting. The Germans didn't completely give up on the V-3. They built smaller, simplified versions. Instead of those massive 130-meter installations, they constructed shorter, more mobile versions that could be set up more quickly. And in late 1944, they actually deployed 2 of them near Lampeden in Germany, aimed at Luxembourg. Finally, after all this time, the V3 was going to fire for real. The results were underwhelming. Between December 1944 and February 1945, the V3 batteries fired about 183 rounds at Luxembourg. The results? Minimal damage. A few buildings hit, some civilians killed, but nothing remotely close to the devastating psychological weapon it was supposed to be. Why? The problems were everywhere. Accuracy. The shells landed all over the place. You couldn't actually aim at anything specific. You could just sort of point it in the general direction of over there and hope for the best. Reliability. The multi-stage system was incredibly complex. Charges didn't always fire at the right time. Sometimes barrels would just blow up. Maintenance. These things broke down constantly. The amount of engineering support required for what was essentially a fancy artillery piece was absurd. Range. Even the simplified versions couldn't achieve the ranges that were promised. The physics just didn't work out as well as the engineers had hoped. The final assessment. By February 1945, the Germans abandoned the V3 batteries. The weapon that was supposed to change the war had fired fewer than 200 shots total, killed a handful of people, and basically accomplished nothing. For comparison, the V2 rocket program killed over 9,000 people. The V1 flying bombs killed over 6,000. The V3? Maybe a few dozen casualties total, and that's being generous. Engineering brilliance isn't enough. So what happened? How did such an ambitious, technically sophisticated weapon turn out to be such a complete dud? The answer is actually pretty simple. It was too complicated. War doesn't reward complexity. War rewards things that work reliably, can be mass-produced, and don't require a team of PhD engineers to operate. The V3 required perfect synchronization of dozens of explosive charges, massive infrastructure that took years to build, constant maintenance and technical support, ideal conditions to even have a chance of working. Meanwhile, a regular artillery gun could be built in a factory, hauled to the front line by a truck, and operated by a crew that learned how to use it in a few weeks. Vulnerability. The other problem. The V3 was incredibly vulnerable. Because of its size, it couldn't be moved. Once you built it, it was stuck there. A giant, stationary target just begging to be bombed. Compare that to a V2 rocket, which could be launched from a mobile platform and be long gone before anyone even knew where it came from. The V3 was the opposite of agile. It was the Titanic of weapons. Huge, impressive, and ultimately doomed. The bigger picture. There's a broader lesson here about Nazi Germany's whole approach to wonder weapons. Instead of focusing on reliable, mass-producible weapons that could actually help on the battlefield, they kept chasing these moonshot projects. Jets, rockets, superguns, all incredible technology, but none of it changed the fundamental reality that Germany was running out of soldiers, fuel, and time. The V3 is almost a perfect symbol of this. Brilliant engineering in service of a fundamentally doomed cause. The forgotten weapon. So why don't we talk about the V3? Simple. It failed. History remembers the weapons that worked. The V2 gets talked about because it actually killed thousands of people and because it led to the space age. The atomic bomb gets talked about because it ended a war. The V3? It's a footnote. A what if that never was? But I think that makes it more interesting, not less. The final thought. The V3 supergun could have changed the war. It could have bombarded London from across the sea. It could have been one of the most terrifying weapons ever deployed. But instead, it became a symbol of how even the most ambitious engineering projects can fail when they're too complex, too vulnerable, and too late. Sometimes technology isn't ahead of its time. Sometimes it's just ahead of what's actually possible. And that's why the gun that was supposed to destroy London is now just a forgotten bunker under a French hillside, visited by the occasional historian and war tourist. And that's probably for the best. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten military history, hit that subscribe button. Next time, we're talking about T's next video. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.